all, thanks everyone for coming. We appreciate it. We thought this is our spring program for League of Women Voters. And about last week, it was looking not like spring, but I'm glad you came out. It warmed up a little bit. I'm Janet Nelson, was part of the planning committee for this program. And I would first like to give a shout out to my committee members, Bianca Camargo, Marilyn Rockstro, and Linda Cole. And our topic tonight, as you already know, is bought and paid for, the role of money in representative government. Our speaker is Alisa Kaplan, who's Executive Director for Reform for Illinois. And something I learned, those of you who might be in my era, originally from Illinois, remember Senator Paul Simon. And he, along with then Lieutenant Governor Bob Kustra, formed that Reform for Illinois, albeit under a different name. I do remember that Paul Simon was a Democrat. I had to be reminded that Bob Kustra was a Republican, so this was bipartisan right from the beginning. And it sure is nice to see bipartisanship. It's getting a little rare. And I think Alisa was telling you a little more about Reform for Illinois. Alisa comes to us with expertise in law and political science. She has a law degree as well as a PhD in political science. She is a serious advocate for making sure that government works not just for the wealthy and well-connected, but for everyone, which I think is what representative government is supposed to be. And although she is serious about those issues, I did find out, much to my delight, that she also has a great sense of humor. And I did think, given the topic, that a sense of humor might well be a requirement to work in this field. But I'm very pleased to introduce Alisa Kaplan as our speaker tonight.
Can you check the mic, please?
Yeah, so I guess we should use the mic. Is that better?
Yes.
That helpful? Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Janet, for the lovely introduction. I really appreciated that. It's been a really long time since I've been in front of actual three-dimensional people. It's been a really weird and wonderful experience. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here to visit your lovely town of Aurora. I'm actually on the board of my local League of Women Voters in Evanston, so I have great respect for the League's work and what you all do. I think there's a lot of overlap in our goals for government and for our political system and society in general, and the work that the League does. We have worked with the League closely on a number of different issues, including expanding voting access and in some instances campaign finance reform and things like that. So you're a long institutional partner of Reform for Illinois, and before that the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform. So I'm very happy to always have an opportunity to talk to the League. I did make a presentation, but I hope this can be a free-flowing conversation as well. Feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask something or focus on something and go a little more in depth on something. I have no idea how long this presentation is going to be, so we'll just have to sort of play it by ear. Janet told me that we have time. So, I did choose to focus on, we focus mostly on state and local issues, in large part because we feel those are desperately neglected areas, especially in today's media environment and today's political circus, a lot of our attention, a lot of the oxygen gets sucked up into the federal level. And although that's understandable, so much of what affects our everyday lives, and especially the everyday lives of people who are more vulnerable than us, happens at the state and local level. And so when I got into this work, I was really dismayed to find out how little people, including myself, I used to be one of those people, knew about state and local politics, considering how important that they are. There's a lot of reasons for that, as I said, and decline in local journalism and all of that. But I think you will find that state and local politics are really fascinating, and have their own kind of circus as well, for better and for worse. And so we'll talk about some state and local stuff today, although a lot of the campaign finance theories and principles that I'm talking about and rules that I'm talking about are federal as well, or have federal echoes. Okay, so can you just, does that work too? Okay, Janet talked a little bit about who we are. This is our mission and our vision. We work on, we believe that ethics and corruption are related to inequity, because corruption usually benefits those who can pay, right? And to a large extent, that's what we're talking about here, is how pay-to-play politics and a system that encourages elected officials to pay the most attention to people who can pay hurts people who can't, and hurts everyday Illinoisans. Janet covered this. So in our quest to make Illinois government more responsive to the people it's supposed to serve, we focus on 4 major issues. Anti-corruption and ethics reform, as I said, so whether that's lobbying, revolving door provisions, or stronger oversight for the legislature, or any type of ethics reform. There's lots of work. Usually when I tell people that I work on this in Illinois, I have to wait a few minutes for them to stop laughing. Oh, you think, you have an impact on that. But I always say that the only way to make sure that nothing gets better is to stop trying. And we do see progress. We really do. Believe it or not, we see progress in Chicago and in Illinois, and we just have to keep chipping away at it. Election reform, because the broader the franchise, the better represented people will be, right? So now, for example, we're working to expand remote voting access to people with disabilities, any types of voting access issues we may explore. Ballot access, making sure that a wide range of candidates can get onto the ballot, because a lot of people get discouraged from running or kicked off the ballot before they even manage to get there, and that limits our choices and who can be in the government. And campaign finance, which is going to be the theme today. So mostly we do this through advocacy and education. So we are lobbyists. I am a registered lobbyist, and we talk to lawmakers both at state and local levels. We spearheaded the recent effort to pass ranked choice voting in Evanston, for example. So we might do that kind of local project, but we're now working on ranked choice voting and other issues both in Chicago and at the state level. So we'll work at any level where we see problems and opportunity. Our Illinois Sunshine Campaign Finance Database, which you'll see a lot of today, which is a wonderful tool for anybody to go onto. And has anybody used it here or seen it? You have, okay, cool. You'll see what it looks like here. You can just go on and search a candidate or an individual and see if they've donated a significant amount of money or who's donated to your candidate. So we've been running that. We were the first state level database to put that information online. And that's very important because it lets you see who's contributing to your elected officials and therefore who's influencing them, right? We do a lot of research to highlight problems and to help us develop good policy. And we're a watchdog. If you follow any of the Chicago papers or some of the state press, you'll often see me. I'm person that reporters will call if they have a campaign finance question or they want some, commentary on an issue, and we will call out elected officials. I will say that, I don't love being called on to judge my fellow man, and my focus is always on the system that creates and incentivizes certain behavior and not, an individual example of some kind of, nonsense, even though reporters often want the term. They sometimes don't love that, and I'm like, well, really, it's the system, not the person under it's. So I want to talk about these 3 issues today. The concentration of funds and influence in the hands of a few and the effect it has on Illinois' democracy. Illinois' self-funding loophole, otherwise known as the millionaire's exemption, and how, oh my God, it's 111. How? I don't know how.
They're all important.
Okay, so people do know about this. Can I see a show of hands? How many people know about it? A few people and then others don't. Okay, good. You may know it by a different name, or you just may know it and not know what it is, or you may not. I'm surprised at the number of people, even if they've been very involved in politics, local politics, who don't know about it. And then super PACs and dark money. So some of this you may know, some of it you may not, but that's where it goes. Okay, so in Illinois, this is true almost wherever you are in the United States, but it's particularly true in Illinois for the reasons that we'll get into, that our campaign finance system is controlled by a small number of people. And we're gonna see that kind of in practice using our Illinois Sunshine tool. Just a little background here. This is the main regime here. These are contribution limits to a candidate. Okay, there are different kind of committees, but this one focuses on contribution limits to a candidate. So an individual like you or me, we can give $6,900 to a candidate. It's actually quite high compared to other states. Anybody know what it is at the federal level? $2,900. So it's quite high in Illinois. $13,700 for a corporation or a labor organization, $68,500 from another candidate committee, which happens often. Candidates often give each other money, or a political action committee, and that could be a political action committee that belongs to a labor organization or any kind of business association where they pool their money and use it for political contributions. And then these two, unlimited for a political party committee, that's the Democratic Party of Illinois, for example, or the Senate Democrats, Senate Democrat Victory Fund, they all have names like that. Political party committee can give unlimited funds to a candidate. And that's a mistake too. I'm gonna have to have words with my employee who helped me put this together. This is actually when a candidate self-funds, this last arrow should say when a candidate self-funds, when they put in a certain amount of money, all contribution caps are lifted, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So no, that's not right. It's when a candidate self-funds. This is what Illinois Sunshine looks like, the site that we administer. So you can just go there and you can just search for a candidate or the name of a donor that you're looking for and see what they've done. And you'll have some, we usually feature some races. We just changed this to the mayoral race, which is the Chicago mayoral race, which is the big news lately. This is lower on the page, you can just see some recent political donations. So you can be like, I don't know where money is moving now. This is, you can just go and you see the magnitude of the money that moves in Illinois politics. I've been doing this work for quite some time and I have not gotten used to it. It's just jaw-dropping, the amounts of money that flow in Illinois politics. So most of this, not all of it, is related to the mayoral race. And you see our top earner is Paul Vallis. So I'm gonna start out not with the Chicago mayoral race, but with statewide, because you guys don't live in Chicago, so, but we are all affected by what goes on at the state level, and also it's just, it's important it gives a good illustration of the kinds of things that we're talking about. So if you look up Governor Pritzker, this is a screenshot, you can look at his top donors. So who's Governor Pritzker's top donor? Governor Pritzker is. And I don't know if you can see that, but he has given himself $323 million over his 2 elections. Which for him is probably not a lot of money, but I think most of us can't even comprehend the amount, right? Like how you would spend that amount of money. His second top donor is the Democratic Party of Illinois, but that's mostly because they've done work for him that's registered as an in-kind contribution, and he more than paid them back for that, as you'll see. And then Matthew, I don't know why these other people gave him money. Like, why would you give him money? Does not need money. I just don't get it, but apparently people give him money. And you'll see some of these names, you may recognize some of these names: Leslie Bloom, Fred Eichner, Chaim Sabin. If you follow Illinois money, you'll see a lot of recurring names, and these are the very wealthy few who control the bulk of our campaign finance. So Governor Pritzker doesn't also only give himself money, he also gives other people money. Here you can see his top 25 expenses. Now, some of these clearly went to his gubernatorial campaign. So these are media companies, $62 million on strategic media, $47 million on grassroots media LLC, whatever that is, 20 million. I mean, again, numbers that just like your tongue falls out of your mouth, and there you see the Democratic Party of Illinois, he gave them 14 million and change. And then you'll see some other numbers here. Democrats for the Illinois House, that would be either Mike Madigan's or, when Madigan was in power, Madigan's committee, his political committee, now it's Chris Welch's committee. He gave them $8 million. The Democratic majority, which was one of Madigan's political committees, he gave $7 million. And so Kwame Raoul's campaign, he gave almost $4 million, and on and on and on and on and on. And so what I'm trying to impress upon you here is that J.B. Pritzker's influence, not just as a governor, but as a funder, is tremendous. And all of these groups and all of these people owe him. And you should keep that in mind. This forms a certain type of relationship, and it also forms a type of dependence, as we saw when Rauner left. Rauner came in, he did something similar, although to a smaller scale, gave millions to other legislators and to Republican elected officials. When he left, they were kind of like, where's my money? No more money, and they were a little bit up a creek. And you're seeing something a little bit similar now with Ken Griffin, although a lot of wealthy people have stepped into his shoes. So this is just to give you an idea of how money flows in and out to the political system. So here's another person who may not be super independently wealthy himself, but has tremendous control over the campaign finance and political system, much like his predecessor, Speaker Madigan, did. They are following the same playbook, at least when it comes to campaign finance, taking in just tremendous amounts of money. So here you can see who dominates Chris Welch's donors, top 25 donors. Unions. Very hard to overestimate the influence of unions in Illinois politics. Union members in Illinois, about 13% of the employed population. But their influence in both Illinois and Chicago politics is huge. So you can see, again, kind of mind-blowing amounts. You'll see some trade organizations, the Healthcare Council of Illinois, keep that one in your mind. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but it's the nursing home lobby, they're very powerful as well. And
Which one is that? I'm sorry.
the Healthcare Council of Illinois.
Okay, thanks.
And then you just see a number of different unions, and Michael Sachs, who's a reliable Democratic mega donor, contributed huge amounts of money to Mike Madigan's accounts as well. Now, what you won't see on this particular list, because the 25th donor gave 179,000. And these are cumulative, so these top 25 donors are over the life of the campaign committee, so you can see how much they've given cumulative. And that date is the latest date. Okay, so what you don't see is one of the biggest donors to Chris Welch's account is Chris Welch himself. He donated, loaned $100,001 to his campaign account. A little bit of a strange amount. The reason that he did that is because in Illinois law, you have what's called the self-funding loophole. So just to give you a little bit of history around the self-funding loophole, because I know this is way too wordy, so you don't have to worry about that. Back in 2009, believe it or not, Illinois didn't used to have campaign contribution limits at all. And there's still states that don't. There's still some states that don't have any, but Illinois didn't until 2009. What happened in 2009? Rod Blagojevich scandal, which involved some campaign finance issues. And so, scandal sometimes makes people act. And in that case, actually, our organization, way before my time, was very involved in getting those first campaign contribution limits passed. But one of the compromises was to let in this self-funding loophole. And the idea was that if somebody spends $100,000, actually it has to be 100,001, which is why that's the amount that you often see, then all contribution caps are lifted. At the state level for governor and statewide offices is $250,000. So the idea behind this was actually kind of reasonable. The idea was that, let's take JB Pritzker, who ran against some non-wealthy candidates in the 2018 primary, right? He can spend as much as he wants because the US Supreme Court will let us limit how much a person can spend, right? They say that's a freedom of speech issue. So we can't stop him from spending as much money as he wants. So if he can spend as much money as he wants, then what about his opponent who may not be wealthy? His opponent still has to go around collecting $6,000 contributions. Doesn't really seem fair, So the idea behind this, although I suspect some people might have been that it might have some uses past this, was to help even the playing field between wealthy candidates and non-wealthy candidates. Now the non-wealthy candidates, instead of scrambling around for $6,000 donations, could go and try to get those big mega $100,000, $200,000, $1 million donations. So that was the idea behind it, and sometimes it does work like that. In the primary with JB Pritzker, for example, it didn't turn out to be enough, but that's still, helped, give his opponents maybe a little bit of a leg up. However, it's often not used that way, as we'll see.
Unintended consequences.
So these are donations these are some of the largest individual donations, so not cumulative, that have come into Chris Welch's account. If you go back, you see that he loaned himself this amount on September 17th, 2021. By the way, he just did this again because it's a new campaign cycle. He just did it again this morning. He gave himself another $100,000 and won. So on September 17th, on September 30th, he received $569,000. Normally from that PAC, depending on whether it's a PAC or not, he would only be able to get either $12,000 or $68,000, not $569. On December 15th, he got $402,000. On December 13th, he got $400,000, and so on and so forth. Then a few months later, he got $1 million contributions. Because that was a loan, he can pay himself back. And he will, every year. Mike Madigan did the same thing, although sometimes I think he actually picked in the actual money. But all the legislative leaders do this. Because of this, Chris Welch, who ran against this poor guy, Eddie Corngay, who raised exactly nothing. In his last campaign cycle, Chris Welch raised $22 million.
Wow.
To run essentially unopposed.
Oh.
So what is he doing with this money? Similar to what happens, what we saw with JP Pritzker. Democrats for the Illinois House, Democratic Party for Illinois, Friends of Mary Kay O'Brien, who ran for Supreme Court, and so on and so forth. Oh, here's his, he paid himself back. See, that $100,000 that he paid himself back. So all he did was trigger that loophole, take in that money, pay himself back, and just rake in the money. And so the result of this is that a provision that was meant to even the playing field between wealthy and non-wealthy candidates actually ends up amplifying the effect of very wealthy or deep-pocketed special interests. Yeah.
So in essence, you can loan yourself $101,000.
Yeah.
And then you pay yourself back with contributions you get down the road.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure I
Yeah.
understood that.
That's right. So there's essentially no cost. I mean, as long as you can find the $100,000 somewhere, you know, I'm sure there would be people willing to lend, you know. Right, if you were Chris Welch, probably, you know, so there's essentially no cost to triggering this loophole, which is why we've seen it become a regular practice. And again, yes, I'll get to you in 1 second. And again, what this helps do is consolidate power among a few people, the people who do this, and then all of these special interests and wealthy donors know it becomes, you know, it's like a deal. Welch gets all this power in exchange for the ability to give tremendous amounts of money and influence. So it becomes this relationship. But do tell me if I'm not using the microphone part. So it becomes this relationship, this sort of holy or unholy alliance, depending on what your perspective is, between donors and the leadership. Yeah.
Isn't the self-funding supposed to come from the candidate or a family member? They're not supposed to borrow the money, like you said, you're kind of winking over there. You're not supposed to borrow the money from somebody else.
No, you're not.
It's supposed to come from the candidate or your spouse.
Yeah, you're not supposed to. So,
So who polices that?
I don't know that anybody really does. But it's true that you're not supposed to. So I don't want to suggest that they are. I mean, they very well might have $100,000 sitting in the bank, certainly Mike Madigan did, so they very well might have that money and loan it to themselves. The point is they can just take it back. So this is not in the spirit of why the self-funding provision was passed. In fact, it's kind of the opposite the way it ends up working. And I should add, no other state has it. Only Illinois.
Wow.
And it is one of the reasons that we consistently see very expensive elections in Illinois, more so than in other states. We're certainly not the only state that has expensive elections. We're a large and populous state with a big economy, but we consistently punch above our weight when it comes to what we spend on elections. And this is a big reason why. And, I would argue that this type of concentration of power is one of the things that contributed to problems like what we're seeing, the fallout from the Madigan administration, which is that because of the amount of money he had to dole out, nobody could afford to buck him. Nobody could afford to speak out against him because it meant you weren't going to get your campaign funds or you could fund a primary against you. Yeah.
What year did you say that provision was passed?
2009, along with the first contribution tax. They all went into effect in 2011. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, if we didn't have this self-funding loophole, what would it look like?
It would look more like what it looks like in other states. You would have the problem that when you have a wealthy candidate, their opponents would be in the position of having to just raise money in the usual way. We've proposed some possible fixes for the self-funding loophole that, first of all, getting rid of the ability to loan your campaign money to at least impose some kind of cost on triggering it, but also possibly doubling or tripling or even quadrupling the contribution caps rather than getting rid of them entirely. There's a number of different things that you could explore. Yeah,
Because in this picture, $100,000 is not a big chunk of money.
that's right.
It's a speck.
Right. That's right. That is not the case in other states. I mean, it depends, on the state and the level of office. They have different contribution limits. In some states they're higher and it depends on the office, but not like this generally. Anything else? Yeah.
So if you self-fund yourself, that eliminates the cap for all candidates?
For everyone. Mhm. Yeah, for everyone. The other way it can happen actually is that an independent expenditure group or super PAC can spend $100,000 on supporting you. And then that blows the caps off for the same type of reason, because super PACs can raise unlimited amounts of money. The US Supreme Court has said, and so there's no way of limiting that. And so the idea was, well, we'll take those handcuffs of contribution caps off people who are involved in a race against a super PAC. And sometimes that happens. The very first time this happened with Jim Durkin's caps were blown by super PAC. For a while, he was a little squeamish about getting caps off, but then he sort of went back to. I mean, it creates a system where everybody now has to compete like this. This is what I say about, it's not so much about the individuals, although somebody started this, but it's eventually you end up in a ridiculous system, and in order to compete, you have to keep doing all these ridiculous things. Yeah. Oh, you didn't have your hand up? No. Just to show you that Durkin did the same thing. And you can see how much money he took in from Ken Griffin, $12 million. And from the Browners, 9 million, another 3 million from the Browners. And oh, and by the way, look who we see, Healthcare Council of Illinois. So you would think, sometimes people say, if there's nothing wrong with money in politics, because people are just trying to get, it's not about quid pro quo or pay to play, because people are just trying to get people who represent them well elected. They give them that money because they think they'll represent them well. It's not about influence. Then why is this group contributing to both Republicans and Democrats? And that's not uncommon. Anything else interesting on this?
I see something that I think is interesting,
Yeah.
and I've noticed it before. Let's take the Illinois Republican Party.
Yeah.
They gave $737,840.
Yeah.
And 34 cents.
Okay, so it's likely that those are in-kind contributions where the Illinois Republican
Okay.
Party probably did some printing or
Okay.
something like that, or some canvassing, paid canvassing, and it gets registered. They have to account for it up to the cent, so it gets registered as. Does everybody know what in-kind means? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Looks like there's a couple unions up there too.
Yeah, and you saw, like with Paul Vallis, sometimes the unions split a bit. The trade unions might go in a different direction from the service unions, for example. Associated beer distributors, they're huge too. When I first started working in this market, it's like, beer people? Like Illinois is run by beer and nursing homes, they're all over the place, the beer people. So. This basically is just a summary of what I just said, which is that this loophole allows to happen in the system is mega donors and special interests get more influence by being able to make these huge contributions. The legislative leaders get more power by being able to accept those contributions and then being able to distribute their largesse to their favored candidates and against their unfavored candidates, whatever, favored candidates. And then the political party committees, because of that table that I showed you at the beginning, they can give unlimited amounts to the candidates those political party committees are usually controlled by those same candidates, by Welch or Madigan or Herman, and so they're just acting as a funnel to give the money to candidates that they want to win. Any questions before we move on to Chicago? Yeah.
Where do you get your figures from and are
Yeah.
they reliable?
Yes, so the Illinois State Board of Elections collects the data. The law, Illinois actually has pretty decent disclosure laws, believe it or not, and the law requires campaigns to report any donation $1,000 or above within a few days. We get information about smaller donations only quarterly. But those big donations are reported every few days. We actually have a tweet bot. If you're like a giant campaign finance nerd, that tweets out those contributions, those $1,000 and up contributions as they come in, and so we can see in real time how money is coming in. And many a night I've been like kind of drowsing off and looking at my phone. I see like $2 million coming up, like, you know, and we have to send off some little tweet or communication about it. So our site, the Illinois State Board of Elections, has all of that data, but their site is really terrible and hard to navigate. So that's what Illinois Sunshine helps you do.
However, I would share that I call them during election season almost on a weekly basis.
Good for you.
They are one of the most helpful
Yeah.
public offices there are.
Yeah.
They will walk you through stuff.
Yeah.
You know, there's one guy one year, I thought, God, I should ask him for Thanksgiving. I thought.
Was that bad teacher?
That, I can't even remember his name. It was a couple of years ago, but they are wonderful. So do not hesitate. And they're more friendly in Springfield than they are in Chicago.
We talk to Matt Diedrich, who's the main spokesperson, fairly often. What's going on with this? Like, what's with this committee? You know, and they are always prompt and responsive and helpful. And they help us maintain our database too, because, you know, whenever we have problems, we talk to them about, you know, we have to talk to them about the technology stuff, and they've always been helpful, and they understand the importance of providing this information.
That's the election office.
The Illinois State Board of Elections, yeah, there's a campaign finance division. Yeah.
Are donations to the super PAC anonymous?
Okay, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So I just want to talk about the Chicago mayoral races. Similar themes here. First of all, note the red box. This is actually a mistake. In fact, we just talked to Matt Dietrich about this. Paul Vallis only loaned himself $100,100. He went in for the extra $99. But he made a mistake on the date, so it got counted twice. So the state board is like working this out. So there are inaccuracies do show up, but they're never our fault. They're always the state board's. So he did that on March 2nd. The caps do get reinstated every round of the election, so they were blown in the primary by Willie Wilson, who was a truly self-funding candidate, did not give himself that money back. He actually put that money in, and he blew off the caps by giving himself $100,000. No more Willie Wilson in the runoff, so Paul Vallis did it, and it is a loan, and I do expect that he will pay himself back. Now you see some of the other, I don't know if you recognize any of these names, having followed Illinois and Chicago politics now, they're all very familiar to me because they come up over and over and over again. Mike Kaiser is now with his wife, Rosalind, who's down here, Rosalind Kaiser, given $900,000 to Paul Vallis, which is just about 10% of his total funds raised. So you tell me, if Mike Kaiser calls Paul Vallis, is he going to take that call? Oh, yeah, going to take that call, right? Craig Duchy-Swap, most of these people are finance people. In Chicago, the main donor class, aside from labor, is finance, and they often go head to head. Step by step in the last mayoral election, we watched that, and we've seen it to a certain extent here. You know, finance will give some money, Ken Griffin or somebody else will give some money, and then the unions come in with the same amount of money, and then, you know, and it's step by step like that, escalating arms race all the time. So Paul Finnegan, there's a number of people here who are associated with Madison Dearborn, which is a capital, venture capital firm. Gerald Beeson is the CEO of Citadel. Citadel of Ken Griffin fame. Ken Griffin is the CEO of Citadel. He has not contributed yet to this race, but several of his top executives have, to very large tunes. So you can just see the magnitude of the money. Sam Zell is another one who shows up a lot. Brian C. Miller, these are almost all finance. Michael Kaiser actually is not. Does anybody know what he does? He builds golf courses. Yeah, he used to he used to be a greeting card tycoon and he builds golf courses. So it's apparently very, very profitable. It's like, yeah. So we like to slice and dice some of this information so we can figure out, you know, what exactly type of concentration are we talking about here. And I just ran these numbers a couple days ago. About half of Paul Vallis's money comes from 20 individuals, 20 just wealthy individuals. So again, we're talking about 20 people, and there are many more wealthy individuals who have given him large amounts of money who can pick up that phone and you can bet that Paul Vallis will answer it. And it's nothing against Paul Vallis. That's just the way the system works. Yeah.
Now, obviously, Pritzker did not donate to Vallis's campaign in order to avoid partiality, but would he then contribute to the mayoral campaign once it becomes, you know, decided who it is that the Democratic candidate is going to be?
Chicago elections are nonpartisan, so they're neither of these are Republican or Democrat, at least, you know, avowedly. He has said he's staying neutral in this particular race. But you know, he certainly donated to other candidates. That he was very involved in the Supreme Court race, for example, the Illinois Supreme Court race gave a lot of money. Oh, sorry. Yes. So again, 20 donors, and that's about it's about $5.5 million with the 20 donors, and 2/3 of the money is from donations 50K and above. So again, this is not money from you and me. This is money from people who have tremendous resources and who represent really probably a pretty small slice of, you know, Chicago's population. Brandon Johnson's top donors. Oh my goodness. Really? Have I been talking for 45 minutes? Is everybody good for time? We're okay? Good. Brandon Johnson's top donors. What's the big thing that CTU? Not just CTU, but the American Federation of Teachers, SEIU Healthcare, the Illinois Federation of Teachers, so unions. About 2/3 of his money. Unions account for, actually, this is a little bit old. Unions account now for about 95% of his total. So it's not 97%, it's 95, 94, 95%. And 2/3 of all his money comes from teachers' unions. So, you know, this has obviously been a bit of an Achilles heel for him in the campaign. That is he going to be, to what extent is he going to be indebted to the teachers' unions? And something I think has gotten a less attention, but should, is to what extent is Paul Vallis going to be indebted to his donors? You know, so it's definitely not one candidate or the other that has this problem. One thing that concerns us a lot is this was all mayoral candidates, including the primary candidates. We can look at how much money comes from donations, $150 and below. They're not itemized. Like if you give less than $150 to campaign, they might take your name, but they're not required to report it. So it's only reported every quarter how much money they took in from donations like that. So the last quarter we have data for is the end of last year. The next data we'll get in mid-April. So we know that people like you and me who gave up to $150 gave 0.9% of the total funds in the Chicago mayoral race. And this was fairly consistent across candidates, the candidates who, purported to be of the people and the ones who didn't. Nobody had more than pretty much 1%. So, to us, this is a serious problem because everyday people are having virtually no financial impact on who gets elected, and on the political conversation, basically, that we all hear on the television and on the radio and in Facebook ads, et cetera, et cetera. And this is consistent. We did the same study in 2019, and it was about 1.5%. At the time, Lori Lightfoot had the highest percentage of small donors at around 8%. But now she had about 1% this year. And this again is very low in Illinois compared to other states. Again, probably because of what we were talking about. And almost 60% of the funds, this is again, all the primary candidates came from people who gave $10,000 or more. So again, these are very wealthy people who are having truly outsized influence on these races. Okay, any questions on any of that before we move on to super PACs? No, that's just a kind of like, I know, it's a lot. Yeah.
Just wondering if a large amount of the money that they do take in just goes back to their, compatriots or whatever you want to call them. Does it really make that much difference in the election? I mean,
No, that's probably not going to be true of the mayoral house. That's probably not going to be
no,
true.
it gets elected though.
Right,
That's what I'm saying. If they're using huge amounts of money to go back to the people that donated it or to, their compatriots, then are they actually funding their campaign?
yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because that's not something that the mayoral candidates will do. They are going to spend 99% of this money on their own campaigns.
Okay.
The legislative leaders do that. The Speaker of the House, the Senate President, the Senate Minority Leader, et cetera. They do that because, first of all, they barely have to run. I mean, they don't run competitive races. You think Mike Madigan has had a competitive race? Well, since what, 1982, he had a competitive race, right? He hasn't had a competitive race in years and years and years. So they don't really need that money, but they still take it. I mean, you saw Chris Welch, he ran virtually unopposed. He took in that tremendous amount of money to project his own power and build the party. I would say project his own power, sort of the negative side of it, and to build the party is, depending again on where you look at it, to help candidates that you think should win. You could see that as positive. I think there has to be some balance. Yeah.
When the unions give money, that's coming from their members, correct?
Correct. And I do think that's an important distinction. I do think that it's important to remember that unions represent people
Who are not millionaires.
who are not millionaires, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I would say that, again, their influence is likely disproportionate compared to their membership, and that also whenever you have you're kind of making an assumption that the leadership necessarily represents the people. Some people here are nodding their heads. The leadership develops their own interests, I would say. But I do think that it's an important distinction, and in that sense, it is a more democratic, small D way of funding. But I do think that if you looked at it dollar for dollar, person for person, the influence is quite outsized. Yeah.
You said that Lori Lightfoot in her first race got about 8% up from individual small donors.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a correlation between a larger percentage, more than the 1% of individual donors and who will be voted and win an election?
Honestly, it's so hard to tell because we have so few people who actually get decent percentages from small donors. So I don't know, it could have been related to her support. Maybe that meant she had a little broader base of support, but 8% really, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I would say, yes, theoretically, that would indicate more grassroots support, certainly a different type of support, but 8% is still really small. And B, we just don't really have enough examples, at least in Illinois, to say, sadly. You know, even for aldermen, we did it recently, and I think the number was 6% or something like that. So it's still quite low. Was there another question? Okay, so let's talk about super PACs, because there were some questions and it's becoming a confusing area of the law. So probably everybody knows it was created by a series of US Supreme Court decisions, including but not limited to Citizens United. Super PACs are subject, and this is, nobody can change this in the state of Illinois. The US Supreme Court has said that we cannot impose caps on super PACs. The reason for this is,
And is there a difference between just a PAC?
Yes.
And you're gonna explain that.
yes, it is very confusing because sometimes like journalists and a lot of people fail to make the distinction. PACs are allowed to donate directly to candidates. If you have to remember one thing, remember that. PACs are allowed to work with candidates and to donate directly to candidates. And because of that, there are, we are allowed under Supreme Court decisions to limit that. The idea behind the Supreme Court not refusing to limit contributions, or saying that we cannot limit contributions, is that the Supreme Court has said that the only justification for limiting contributions is corruption, and a very specific narrow type of corruption, quid pro quo corruption. So the idea being that contribution caps help reduce the amount of influence that any one person or entity can have. So as we've been saying, if somebody gives $6,900, which is the individual cap right now, to a candidate, it's still kind of a lot of money, honestly. Most people can't just give $6,900, but if somebody gives $6,900, they're going to have a lot less influence than somebody who gives $100,000, $200,000, $900,000. And so the Supreme Court's idea was, by reducing the scope of that influence, we can reduce the possibility of quid pro quo corruption, that you'll be asking for a big favor in return for that donation. Does that make sense to everybody? So the idea behind super PACs not being able to, behind us not being able to limit, and by us I mean the state of Illinois or anybody not being able to limit super PAC contributions, was because they're independent, they're not allowed to coordinate with candidates. So there's no risk, so the Supreme Court thought, of that quid pro quo corruption. It's a separate entity expressing their opinion. So they're not allowed to donate to candidates. They're not supposed to coordinate with candidates about strategy or anything else. They're not supposed to be an arm of a candidate committee. It's just some third person expressing their opinion. And the Supreme Court thought, and we're seeing that they were very, very wrong on that and other impacts of super PACs. They thought that there was then no risk of corruption, and therefore no reason to limit speech, the speech that the money represents, and therefore no contribution caps. Does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
No, you don't?
No, I don't know what you mean by limiting speech.
Oh, because the Supreme Court has said that money is speech.
Ah.
Because it can buy ads and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, the First Amendment says you shouldn't limit speech, but no right is absolute. So even the Supreme Court has said, yes, money is speech, but in this very narrow circumstance, to prevent corruption, to prevent quid pro quo corruption, the exchange of a donation for a favor, you can limit speech by imposing contribution caps. Is that helpful? Yeah, if you want, we can talk about it afterwards. So this is not right. So SCOTUS thought lack of coordination meant no corruption risk. We've talked about that. There was a recent case where a super PAC was established. Now, city contractors, businesses that do business with the city, can only contribute $1,500 in Chicago business. They can only contribute $1,500 to a candidate. This super PAC set up shop, and all of these businesses that do business with the city started contributing. This was a Lightfoot supporting super PAC, so a super PAC that was advertising in favor of Lightfoot. They started contributing to that super PAC. So what do you think? I don't know that there was any kind of corruption at all. But how does that look? Like, we all know who's contributing to that super PAC because super PACs actually have to disclose their owners. Yeah,
How, they have to, because I tried to trace the super PAC once.
yeah,
And
we'll get there, we'll get there.
Okay,
Super PACs
okay.
actually do, this is a little known fact, super PACs actually do have to disclose their donor. It doesn't always work, right? I'll show you in a second, but they do. So in this case, those city contractors, they didn't try to hide it. They gave, I forgot how much money, some, many thousands of dollars. And it was right after Lightfoot had signed off on a contract. It just looks really bad, So this is exactly that kind of case where like, really, there's no risk of corruption. There's clearly, you just can't insulate what goes on in a super PAC to that extent. What? No. Oh, we were just, yeah. Okay, did I miss anything else here?
So they do have to disclose it?
They do, yes, I will show you in a second. Let's skip that for now. Dark money is my favorite topic in campaign finance because it sounds really cool. And everybody always wants to talk about it. But it's very frustrating because this is a super PAC, the Chicago Leadership Committee, they all have names like that. It's like they outcompete each other for blandness. So there was this Chicago Leadership Committee, another one was New Leadership for Chicago. Opposing candidates, but they try to come up with something that nobody's gonna remember, right? These guys have one single donor. So you see, they're required to disclose their donors, so they did. Who's their donor? Better Chicago Future Inc. Okay. Better Chicago Future Inc.'s website. It's a single page that says they're interested in bettering Chicago's future. There's nothing else. They are incorporated. I forget if these guys are incorporated. Oh, they're incorporated in Delaware, PO Box in Philadelphia. And their registered agent, if you go to the Secretary of State's office and look it up, is something like registered agents are us. In other words, there is no way to tell where this $265,000, a significant amount of money that went to oppose Brandon Johnson to lead, where that money came from. Okay. So that's dark money. And it doesn't just go to super PACs because in Illinois, not only individuals, but also corporations and nonprofits can donate directly to candidates. So you do have the potential to have this happen with candidates, but it's most often associated with super PACs. So that's what we're talking about. And there's been quite a bit. There was just a pretty big expenditure of more than $300,000 opposing Brandon Johnson. And there was some dark money in support of Chuy Garcia as well. Now, the same thing with Lightfoot's, the donations to the super PAC. The candidate doesn't have control over who donates. You can say, well, there's all this dark money is going to support Paul Vallis, bad Paul Vallis, but it's theoretically, he might not know anything about it or have any control over it. Is that actually the way it works? We just don't know, always. How easy would it be for some donor to call and say, hey, guess what I'm about to do? I'm about to drop $100,000 in your super PAC, not your super PAC, but the super PAC supporting. So that's part of the problem. The other problem is people, we're seeing these advertisements, right, every day, and we don't know who's paying huge amounts of money to try to influence us. We don't know who's paying huge amounts of money to try to elect these elected officials. We don't know who we're getting in bed with. It's very hard to make an informed decision about a candidate if you don't know who they're indebted to, who believes that they serve, that candidate serves their interests, what interest groups see them as a potential ally. So dark money hinders our ability as voters to make informed decisions about candidates. This business always just like, I just can't believe this is allowed. It just blows my mind. It undermines the whole point of campaign finance disclosure. Yeah.
Okay, I'm assuming that a super PAC must be licensed, registered, something like that. How difficult is it to have a quote unquote legal super PAC?
Very easy. You just have to file the paperwork with the Illinois State Board of Elections. It's this pretty simple form. You do have to have a chairperson and a treasurer, but again, it's often like some lawyer or some political consultant that, doesn't give you much information about, certainly not about where the money is coming from. Sometimes it can tell you a little, if it's a lawyer who usually works for Republicans or Democrats or something like that, but it's not going to tell you where the money comes from.
So you don't have to establish a political affiliation when you set up.
Like Democrat or Republican?
Yes.
No. Okay, no. You have to have a chair and a treasurer who can be the same person. And it's often Better Chicago Future would have to be incorporated somewhere to go through this, to be anonymous. But if you've ever tried to set up a nonprofit or a corporation in Illinois, it takes 10 minutes. And you don't have to give any real identifying information. One other thing I did want to talk about with the coordination issue, that super PACs are not supposed to coordinate with candidates. There's a practice called red boxing. So this is from Chuy Garcia's webpage. And you'll see that he's got a little red box around Media Center. I think he used to have a red box around the whole thing, but then there was an article in the in Chicago Tribune about it and took away the red box. But what you see here is what candidates have started doing. What they're doing is talking to super PACs. So they say, and the red box became the symbol for that. Hey, super PAC, look over here. I'm telling you what I need from you. So Media Center, it's called Media Center, but that's not really what it is. All voters need to see on broadcast TV that Mayor Lightfoot is right. The candidate is telling the super PAC exactly what to say to whom. So, and even, the messaging. So really this business of the super PACs being totally independent of campaign committees is just nonsense. Certainly it's possible for a super PAC to be totally independent, but it's no longer really how the game is played. This is the same thing. He didn't have a red box, Paul Vallis, but same idea. Frequent Chicago municipal voters urgently need to learn now that Brandon Johnson wants to defund the police and raise taxes. This is the message I want out there. Help me get it out there. Okay, we already talked about this. Just to close up here a bit, I talked a little bit about the effects of corruption. Sometimes we think of corruption as a victimless crime or something that doesn't affect everyday people, and these are kind of esoteric, highfalutin concepts. That's not the case. As we said, the people who can afford to pay to play get the benefits, and people who can't get left out in the cold. And that impacts our communities, it impacts investment, it certainly impacts Illinois' reputation, as I'm sure you know. So these are important issues. They're not always easy to put on a bumper sticker, much to my dismay, because I haven't tried. But they are important real world issues. So as we said, SCOTUS has made fixing these problems very difficult. What can we do? One thing that we are big advocates for is public campaign financing. There are lots of different types of public campaign financing. A common type now is a donor like you or me gives $10, and that $10 will be matched by city funds by some factor, maybe a factor of 9 or so. So that $10, I'll give $10, the city gives $90, that's a $100 donation. And all of a sudden, when you add those up, a candidate can rely on everyday people to build a competitive campaign. A lot of big cities have this. New York City's had it since the 80s, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Denver, Washington, DC. Most big cities, if we think of them, they have a public campaign financing system, and some states as well. Increases diversity in government because a broader range of candidates can compete. It increases voter engagement because people are more excited to donate because their donation might actually have an impact. Reduces the power of special interests and wealthy donors, as we've seen, because candidates don't have to rely on them in so much. And strengthens relationships between officials and ordinary people. I'm sure they exist, but I have never met a candidate who likes fundraising. They're not out there in the street talk at a barbecue, asking for $10. They're sitting in a dark room, calling the richest people they know, and begging them for money. And sometimes this takes a tremendous amount of time. It can take up to 80% of a candidate's time. It's time that they're not out there talking to everyday people. They're
Or serving us.
what?
Or serving us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is the $10 contribution made by the individual
Mhm.
that's matched
Yeah.
dedicated to a specific client or candidate, or is it put into a pool that's divided equally among the
No,
candidates? in the race?
It's you give it to the candidate you want. The point is, it's not the city making the decision about where the money is going. It's the individual making the decision about where the money is going. So you're using your voice. It's just that your voice is being amplified by those extra funds to help us compete with some of these, bigger dollar interests.
And are the like corporations allowed to contribute to and get matched?
No, usually not. So these programs are all voluntary. Because of the Supreme Court, we cannot ever make these programs mandatory. So a candidate would have to opt into them. And usually what a candidate does when they opt in is they accept all kinds of other restrictions, like they won't accept money from lobbyists, for example, or or corporations doing business with the city, et cetera, et cetera. So usually that's the way that, there's nothing that says that that's the way it has to work, but usually that's the way it works. Yeah.
On your taxes, when you're paying your taxes, you can check a box that says donate.
Yeah. Yeah. Those funds in Illinois, you're talking about the federal program. Yeah, the federal program was used, actually, Obama was the first one not to use public funds. Because he didn't want those restrictions on corporate money. But part of the reason for that is because the federal program has been underfunded for years. It's just not enough money, but you're absolutely right. I had forgotten about that because my accountant does my taxes, but I had forgotten about that. That you check.
And then is that divided? How's that?
Yes, that is divided equally, and the federal government actually uses a block grant system, which some places use where the usually there's some kind of qualification process where the candidate has to go through some to show they're serious, and then the government will just give them a block amount. But these types of programs, like the small donor multiplication system, are more common. Seattle has a system where they send vouchers to people that they can then give to a candidate. And there are nice things about that because it doesn't require any of your own money. So for people who really don't have any resources, they can still contribute. So yeah. Letitia James, you might have heard of her because she's formed kind of a national profile. She's somebody who she credits her first win in elected office to New York City's public financing program. And she sums up very well why we support these programs. She wasn't politically connected. She didn't know millionaires. All she knew were everyday people. And so with New York City's program, she was able to have enough money to run a competitive campaign. And there are a lot of people who have run with these campaigns who are fervent advocates for that reason. Plus, again, they would rather be out there with people, not in that room, So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do that we talked about a little bit is fix the self-funding loophole. We have a policy paper that I'm sure, not a lot of elected officials, certainly not the legislative leaders read because they don't want to fix the self-funding loophole. But if there becomes enough pressure on the issue, maybe they will. There are certainly some fixes that we can make that would make it much less damaging. And expose dark money. This is actually not an impossible thing to do. So Illinois is not allowed to limit the amount of money that super PACs can raise and spend, but we can force them to disclose it. And we actually have a bill in Springfield that would do that. And it's modeled on bills in California, Massachusetts, several other states that have passed legislation like this. Any big donor would have to say where they got their funds. And then, you know, you couldn't have this series of shell corporations, because if you've given more than $10,000 or some amount like that, that donor would have to say, well, 1,000 came from this guy, 1,000 came from that guy. So you'd have to get it down to the individual or the business ultimately that gave the money. Yeah,
So would you share the bill number?
sure. It's 3804,
Is that a house?
House Bill 3804.
Do you have anybody else lobbying for that?
Not right now. There's not going to be, if you get into some nitty-gritty or problems with Springfield, there's not going to be they're not doing individual elections bills. They're only doing an omnibus bill. So anything would probably go into an omnibus. But
And is that bill still alive as of today?
it's alive. It
But
hasn't
on life
been,
support.
well, it hasn't been passed out of committee for the reason that I said, which is that they're not doing individual elections bills. So like, we wanted to get the language out there. Ultimately, it will, you know, if it went anywhere, it would get incorporated into the elections office. But to our knowledge, it's the first bill of this kind that's been introduced. So, you know, for us, it's the start of an important discussion about dark money. Now, again, both parties benefit from dark money. So you're asking people, and really this gets into my last slide, which is the hardest part of my job is convincing people to change the rules of the game that they know how to win. You know, we're asking them to change campaign finance rules that they took advantage of to get into office. You know, we're asking them to impose oversight over themselves. Nobody likes doing that. The legislature has a tremendous amount of power because they make the laws for themselves, and nobody likes putting handcuffs on themselves. And so as political reformers and as ethics reformers, that is our primary challenge. We face it every day. With a lot of the bills that we bring up, they don't want to see us because we're asking them to do hard things. You know, it's a very challenging road for that reason. But you do get reformers, you do get people, elected officials who want to do the right thing. You just have to, you know, keep working until you get those opportunities and build up as much pressure as you can to get real reform. What you can do, we talked about a bit, educate yourself, hang out on Illinois Sunshine and just, you know, search for a bunch of people, look at who's giving your elected officials money. You can ask your representatives where they stand on these issues. Find out what organizations in your area are involved. You can sign up for our mailing list at reformforillinois.org. And yeah, that's it. We can make progress.